Okay. Are you there, HG?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. All right, sir. Hello, everybody on Facebook Live. Thank you for joining me today. With me, I have a very special guest. I've been very appreciative of finding his work and the things that he has shown me. And now I'm hoping he can enlighten some of you guys. He has a Facebook page. It's called Knowing the Narcissist. He is sharing the way, basically the way through the mind of a narcissist and why they kind of, the things that they do. Oops, I lost him. Let's turn off Wi-Fi. I'm going to have to call back here. Let's turn that off. My bad. Technical difficulties. Calling the UK is hard. Okay, let's call back. Oh, I think I lost you. I was on Wi-Fi calling, so I turned that off. But
Okay.
all right. But I did get you introduced, and we have HG Tudor with us. HG, one of the big things that I have found where people run into this issue is understanding the difference between loving someone like the golden period and always being attached to that, but they're not understanding that a narcissist does not roll with love. There's a whole nother realm of what is considered love. How would you explain that as far as the way a narcissist would think as far as love goes?
The concept of love is something that, as a narcissist, is entirely different from the concept of love as understood by an empathic person. Because of the way that I was brought up, I don't actually understand the concept of love the same way that anybody else would do. For me, as an adult, love manifests as an infatuation with an individual.
Now, HG, now also you talk about the negative fuel. A- Am I correct when I say that the negative fuel drives you more than positive fuel? Like the golden period, the narcissist would rather have the chaos and the drama, and is that?
Essentially, that's right, but one cannot exist without the other. With fuel, it comes in essentially two categories, positive and negative. The positive fuel is whenever somebody happens to smile at me, or somebody tells me that they love me, somebody commits a caring gesture for me. For example, they might make a cake for me or give me a hug. So it comes in gestures, expressions, words, all of those positive things. And depending on who it comes from and the type of gesture or what is said, it has a greater effect on me. So for example, by comparison, if I walk down the street and I pass an attractive lady and she smiles at me because she thinks I look well dressed, presentable and attractive to her, I get a little boost of fuel from that. However, when I get home this evening and my intimate partner tells me that she loves me, I get a much greater boost of fuel. So there are varying degrees. So that's the positive side of it. On the negative side, that comes from hatred, anger, fear, upset, aggression. And many people don't realise that if you stand there and swear as a narcissist and you're angry or you're crying and you're upset calling them names, that's good fuel for us. And that's why we continue to provoke arguments. And that is why we manipulate you to upset you, because the emotional output you're providing is so powerful to us. We want to keep it going. Now, the negative fuel is more potent. It creates a greater sense of power. And the reason for this is that typically we target empathic individuals. And the very nature of an empathic individual is such that one, in inverted commas, call them the good person. Therefore, they enjoy being honest and decent and doing good things for other people and loving and caring. So that comes very naturally to them. In order to get that person to be upset or frustrated or angry, that seeks more effort. And therefore, when those negative emotions are manifested, to know that I have been able to draw them out from the empathic individual reinforces my sense of omnipotence and sense of power, and therefore I get more fuel from it. So, the negative emotions that I receive are more potent. One has to keep in mind, however, that generally speaking, it is what I call the primary source. The person you have usually is an intimate partner, so girlfriend, boyfriend, spouse, etc. That person is the person who sees both the positive and the negative. They have the golden period to begin with, and then the devalue starts, and the negative fuel flows. And the negative fuel that comes from an intimate partner is very powerful indeed. And that will come from devaluation, and it will also come following their escape from us or their discard. For example, if we do not try to get them back into the relationship through a post-discard, but roll out malign manipulations against them which upset them. So, for example, stalking that individual, standing outside their house and we can see them peeping through the curtains and looking frightened. Again, that is very potent fuel. But with that intimate partner, one has to have had the positive to begin with, because the contrast makes it all the more potent.
Wow. Wow. That's deep, HG. That is deep stuff, and it's wow. It triggers some stuff for people that have been through it. Now,
Indeed. I was just to expand on it as well, so people gain an understanding of how it relates to them. I talk about fuel sources, and they're divided into primary, secondary, tertiary sources. So as I've mentioned, the primary source is usually an intimate partner. It can be a family member. In certain instances, but it's usually an intimate partner. Secondary sources are, an outer circle, friends important because we utilize that to confuse our primary source victim. Because the facade enables us to keep pointing to them and saying, well, look, everybody else thinks that I'm really good, and they know that I'm a great guy. You are the only person who seems to have a problem. So you're the one that's got the problem, really, aren't you? And the people in the facade invariably are brainwashed when they do not see the downside of my behaviours. So those categories of applying the different sources are very important in terms of the provision of fuel to my kind.
Wow. Dang. Now, when it comes to, wow, yeah, it's very confusing for a primary source when you're trying to understand that it's really not you, but you really don't know any better until, like, in hindsight, and you have to go through it. And I think that's why it's so important for the work that you're doing. And like, I like to spread the word as much as I can, because the more people can start seeing things at an earlier stage rather than 10 years later, then it's going to help a lot of people from a lot of suffering. So you also talk about the no contact, and no contact being one of the daggers to the narcissist's soul, like to their heart, but it has to be implemented correctly.
Yeah.
Would you be able to touch on that a little bit?
Certainly. From my perspective, love me, hate me, but never, ever ignore me. If you ignore me, you are telling me that I don't matter. You're telling me that I'm not important. And our kind have a heightened sense of superiority, omnipotence, entitlement. And therefore, we have to control our environments. And that means controlling people. And therefore, if that person keeps giving me fuel, then they're functioning how I want them to. If they stop giving me fuel because they ignore me, then that amounts to a huge criticism. No contact is the most effective way of dealing with our kind. It is what has to be done in order to weaken us, and also eventually to cause us to go elsewhere. Everything is about fuel. The sooner people understand that, the more progress they will make. It isn't because we like to sit down and watch Billions with you. It isn't because we like to go water skiing with you. Yes, we will do those things, but only because you give us fuel when we do those things with you. And every time you give us fuel, you make us feel powerful. If you stop giving us fuel, you weaken us. And if you ignore us, you land two blows against us. The first is you're not giving it any fuel. Thus, I start to feel weaker. The second factor is because you're ignoring me. That is a criticism, and we hate to be criticized. Now, it's important to make a distinction here. If someone swore at me with an angry face and called me an effing asshole, that's fuel because they're angry. And although they're using critical words towards me, it doesn't feel like a criticism to me, because I focus on their emotion and not what they're actually saying. If, however, somebody looks at me in a blank fashion and said, "You're nothing to me," that is criticism, and that wounds me. And it reminds me of something that I would rather much not contemplate, and takes me back to a place that I try and fight to stay away from. And that criticism wounds me and ignites the fury that is always churning inside our kind. And this fury causes us to lash out. And the reason we lash out is in order to provoke a reaction from you, to try and get you to give us the fuel again. So it might be you criticize me, I turn around silent treatment. So then you start asking me, what's the matter, what's wrong? And therefore, when you're doing that, you're caring for me. So, if you go no contact, you're taking away the fuel, but you're also criticizing us. And that's why it's a double whammy to us. But it is actually very hard for people to instigate. Because, one, they often do not prepare for it properly. Two, they tend to tip us off that they're going to do it because the empathic individual is decent and honest and feels only right that they should say, look, dear narcissist, it's not working, there are problems between us, I want it to be over. That's a bad move, because if you're telling me that it's about to end, I will do everything I possibly can to stop you leaving me by instigating what's known as a preventative hoover. I might threaten you if I was a lesser variety of narcissist. I might do a pity play if I was a mid-range narcissist. Or if I'm a greater narcissist, one would lay on the charm to haul you back in and stop your no contact before it's even started. So never ever tell the narcissist what you're going to do, and prepare for some time beforehand. You may live with this person and need to sort out alternative accommodation. And I write all about this in my book, Departure Imminent, which sets out all of the things that you should plan for in order to make your getaway effective. If you've done that, then go. And you need to get a head start before we realise what has happened. Because once we know that you have instigated no contact, we will come after you. You belong to us. The narcissistic relationship lasts until you die or I die. The formal relationship might be over. You may say we're no longer boyfriend and girlfriend. That's the formal relationship. The narcissist relationship lasts until death. You are my possession. You provide me with fuel. That is your obligation. If you try and stop doing that, I will come after you to make you give me that fuel back, unless you put in place an effective no contact to ensure that you stay away, that I cannot contact you, and that you effectively become an unattractive fuel source. So I'll go and find somebody else.
Wow. Now, I've also read, and I don't recommend revenge. I mean, that's just me, but I know you wrote a book about it. But I think that for someone to do something like that, they need to become extremely strong and extremely aware of what they're doing. But I know you talked about keeping the being completely neutral in the emotions.
Yeah, that's right. The best way to deal with this is to think that you're reading the news on television, and therefore if you have to interact with us, then do so in a neutral fashion. So the starting point should be, in an ideal situation, you move to the mountains, and we have no idea where you've gone. That is a perfect no contact. Of course, life is like that. We may know where you work, we know where you live, etc. But in my book, No Contact, I set out all the various means that we will use to try and establish contact with you. So therefore, you gain the knowledge of what you need to do and alter to stop that happening. Now, if you have to continue to have some interaction with us, maybe we work in the same place, or most commonly it's because a child is involved, then when you interact with us, you need to ensure that any interaction is the bare minimum, and then when there is, it's neutral. And that is difficult to do, because it is, again, an inherent reaction of an empathic individual when they greet someone to say, how are you? Are you well? That will provide us with a small amount of fuel, because it's caring words. So accordingly, if, for example, there is a handover of children, you would have to either preferably arrange it through a third party, so you don't have to interact with us. But if you have to, then it's a simple case of perhaps handing a note with what the child needs for the weekend written on it, and saying hello and saying goodbye. And if it has to be any discussion, you do so in a neutral fashion. It's difficult, but with practice, it can be done. And of course, we will, because all we care about are ourselves, and all we care about is utilizing the environment to our advantage, we will use the children as excuses to draw fuel from you. We will triangulate you with the children. So we will feign an emergency. And of course, at the first time it happens, you'll be caught off guard, because naturally if you hear that your child is ill, you'll react in an emotional fashion. We get fuel, and that has been an effective hoovering of you. So there are so many different manipulative ways we can utilize, even when you still have to interact with us, in order to draw that fuel from you. And that's why I disclose a lot of this information in what I've written, so you understand, in effect, the underhand tricks that we deploy in order to keep getting that fuel from you and to keep you hanging on the whole time.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. That's why when I started reading your books, I get them on Kindle, and I'm just going from one to the other, downloading one, reading it, and downloading the other and reading it. And actually, I think I have two different ones on two different devices, where I'm kind of in the middle of both of them. So, and I know we talked about keeping this about 30 to 45 minutes. So, if we can, what would it take, in your opinion, to not attract a narcissist? Because I know some people, I know for me it's awareness and just kind of like, I kind of figured out why I became connected with that person, 8-9 years ago, and a lot of things have changed since then as far as personal and spiritual growth. One person asked me, is anything a narcissist says, can they say anything that is actually sincere? How would you go about answering that?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the last thing you said.
Someone asked if
It's a narcissist.
if anything that they say is actually sincere, if they can actually say something genuine.
Everything we say is engineered to serve our purposes. So everything we say will be done in order to manipulate, to gain fuel, to preserve our superiority, and to maintain control. And therefore, one always has to treat with extreme caution what that individual is saying. And as you touched on about, is there anything that can be done to prevent attracting our kind? There's the bad news and the good news. The bad news is, given who you are as an empathic individual, we effectively can sniff you out. And I wrote in Citizen Target about the ways that we are able to identify people who have empathic traits through the things that they say and they do and the gestures that they make. And unfortunately, for an empathic individual, you will always stand out as a beacon to our kind, and you will always attract us. The good news, of course, is that once you understand how we operate, and you understand what to look for, and you understand the hunting grounds in which we operate, you can spot us a mile off, and you can create your own narcissism, which will enable you to identify when a narcissist is showing interest in you. And I've written repeated articles on my blog about signs that you're engaging with, say, a narcissist online, or traits that we look for, or what we look for on your online presence in order to find the right type of target and victim. So there are steps you can take to make yourself less obvious as a target. But ultimately, you can't just switch off your empathic traits and they will continue to attract us. But once you know what we do, you will be able to see the red flags and take notice of them. You'll hear the warning klaxons, you'll see the flashing lights. So you will then actually, and through reading my work, become very skilled at identifying a narcissistic individual, and then you can swerve them, you can evade them and move away. And when that happens, you will face the
sense. That makes sense. I know me personally. I just try to vibrate on a higher level that maybe they're not on, because it's, I don't know. Like, I try to stay within the divine being that I am, and I know many narcissists they just simply are not on that like that playing field, I guess I would say.
Yes, I mean, one important thing to grasp when dealing with the narcissistic dynamic is that out of the same set of facts, there is your perspective and there is our perspective.
Right.
And a lot of the time, people really, really struggle to understand how it is that we behave in a certain way arising out of the same facts. And I often give the example of, if you're serving dinner for everybody, and through reasons of politeness and practicality, you serve your two guests first, then serve yourself because you're sat nearest the kitchen, and then serve the narcissist last. And the narcissist then picks up his plate and throws it to the floor and storms out of the room. Everybody else who isn't a narcissist is thinking, what on earth happened then? What was all that about? Why did he react like that? It doesn't make any sense from your perspective. From our perspective, you just criticised them because you made us feel less important by serving us last. Now, I know from your perspective, people will think, well, that's ridiculous and pathetic. And indeed, from your perspective, it is. But it isn't from us. We need to have our importance reinforced. And therefore, if you criticise us, that is why we suddenly erupt. So it often seems like it's over nothing to you, but it isn't to us. And once you start to grasp that we look at it from a different perspective to you, then you will start to understand. You won't like it, no, he's asking you to like it, but you will start to understand that is why he does that. That is why she gives me the cold shoulder. That is why he storms out of the room when that happens. It is because you will have caused a criticism perceived by us, and therefore it ignites our fury and we react in that method. And once you start to understand that differing perspective, it will go a long way to helping you unravel the seemingly unusual and mystifying behaviour of our kind.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, and to me that comes for the empaths and the healthy humans to. It reminds me. It's just raising your emotional intelligence to be able to see from another person's perspective. And realizing, I know for me when I deal with, or not deal, but I know one thing that I've learned and that I'm hoping, takes me farther in life is, when I'm around other people and see other people, and the more friends I make and the things that they go through, to not place judgment on their reactions for it, but to know that they didn't walk in my shoes to live my experience, and I certainly didn't walk in theirs, and therefore I can, still understand that they're seeing it through their own eyes, and I have no place to judge that. But that is wow, yeah. Trying to look at a narcissist's perspective, though, I guess it would be a little bit more challenging, because it kind of takes. It really is the same approach, I would say, but understanding that is an emotional intelligence that I think a lot of people.
It seems nonsensical to people, but once you actually grasp that we are at war with the world, we're very wary of people. We regard people as looking to cause problems for us, and therefore we want to seduce them to get them under our control. We have this daily need for fuel, reinforcing the key traits that I have of superiority, power, and omnipotence. So, for example, if my football team succeeds and scores a goal, I feel a rush of power because that is my team that I am associated with who are now winning. I like to win. Therefore, I am on a par with the victorious or soon-to-be victorious team. If they lose, I take it as a criticism of me because I regard ultimately myself and the team as the same thing. They are attached to me. Everything is an extension of what I am. This includes the people that I gain fuel from. It will be, for example, going to watch a show. If the show is being enjoyed by people in the audience, my outlook is such that, in a way, they are applauding me as well, because I have chosen to come to this show. It's a good choice because it's a good show. Therefore, the audience are not only appreciating the actors and the performers, they are appreciating my good taste. That is how we place ourselves at the center of the universe. And we do all of that in order to protect ourselves.
Oof. So it's, I mean, I'm taking it, everything is about fuel, literally. Like, you guys wake up, you wake up wondering, or not really even wondering, but you wake up with the intention to get fuel. You don't wake up, like I wake up and can take a deep breath and, you know, and say to myself in a grateful state that I'm grateful for this morning and things like that. You don't do those things, do you?
No, that's right. The difference between you and I is that you effectively self-fuel. My kind are incapable of doing that. Our validation has to come from everybody else. So I could get up and look and say, well, yes, it's a beautiful morning. But my mind's thinking, well, what I need is for somebody else to stand next to me and say, isn't it a beautiful morning? Because then they agree with me. That agreement with me provides me with fuel. I can, if I've received fuel during the course of the day, spend a period of time on my own. Several hours, in fact, if I'm pretty well fueled. So it isn't a constant need to be with people. But if I was isolated, both physically and isolated in terms of technology, so no text messages or email from people, then over a period of time, I would become restless. I would become irritable because there was no fuel. There was no external validation of who I am from the emotions of other people. And the longer that goes on, the worse it would become for me, with potentially deleterious consequences to my mind and my being. And so the self-sufficiency that you have, we do not have. But that said, I've learned through understanding what I am and the work that I have been undertaking through the treatment that I'm ongoing. I understand why I need this fuel, and I am highly efficient at getting it. Highly manipulative, magnetic and charming in order to gain it, and by the same token, abusive and unpleasant if I need to get the negative fuel, say from a primary source. And because I do not have certain emotions that you have, that makes me, motivates me to get the fuel, because I'm not interested in being happy, I'm not interested in joy, I'm interested in fuel. So that makes me single-minded. I have no sense of guilt or remorse. I have no sense of sadness. Therefore, I am not hindered or burdened. So if I say something to somebody which causes them to be hurt, I don't care. I've got fuel. I'm not going to be slowed down and think that person's feelings have been hurt by me. I shouldn't have done it. All that matters is I've got the fuel. So whilst there is no self-reliance in the sense of how you can self-fuel, the difference is I have been created to be effectively a very highly efficient machine.
Wow. I think that was a wonderful way of putting it. It's very, and I will say you have definitely, because I've been studying this for 3 years now, and you've certainly opened my eyes, especially with it coming on the relationship side of things.
Yes.
And
I mean, in terms of the disorder, the two people that know it best are those who are the victims, because they have experienced it, and the narcissists. Of course, most narcissists have no idea what they are, and therefore will not speak about it, because they have no insight. Those of us who I categorize as the greaters know what we are, but invariably will never admit it, because to do so would be to cede control to other people. And as I've mentioned, we always have to be in control.
mm-hmm.
I am able, as a consequence of the work that I've been doing with the good doctors, as I refer to them, to explain all of this process, because my day-to-day life, I continue to get the fuel in the normal way. But I have been able, through the help of the good doctors, to create, if you like, an arena whereby I can share my understanding and also learn from those who are victims as to their experiences and understand more in terms of how they behave. I have had countless victims, and because I know what I am, I watch, I observe, and I learn from them to make me more efficient and to hone my skills. And of course, as part of the treatment, it is to try and gain an awareness of what I am, to understand why I have been created that way, and I've grasped all of those concepts. And the next stage, I'm reliably informed, is then to get me to consider, is there a different way of conducting myself in life? Now, from where I'm sat, I see no reason to change. I am this effective and highly efficient machine. It works. And I perceive the risk of trying to do something else too great to what I have created. However, I also recognize that through this treatment, I have learned much more about myself than I understood before, and therefore I am keeping an open mind in terms of what might come next. Whether I'll change remains to be seen. At the moment, I see no need to, but I may be persuaded to look at it differently, and that is why I continue with it.
Right. Well, I think for a narcissist, you are on a positive track. And it's because, like you said, not many of them will admit it. And then I know for me, if you call them out by that, some of them get they get very angry with it.
Indeed, if in a day-to-day scenario, if someone accused me of being a narcissistic sociopath, I would deny it, and I would make a mental note to raise my game and get back at them. But in the context of my writing and my blog and the Facebook page, etc.,
Mm-hmm.
those people that I relay the information to, I do not need to get fuel from them. Admittedly, I do get a little from them, from their kind and appreciative comments of how I've helped them through what I've written. But that isn't why I'm doing it. I'm doing it to gain a better understanding of what I am, and I'm doing it in order to comply with the treatment terms that have been imposed on me. But it has created an arena whereby I don't have to engage in the same way that I would do in real life. Someone might, I suppose, describe it as a safe place, so that the normal narcissistic rules do not have to apply. But also do bear in mind, of course, that unless you are a tertiary source that I want to insult because you brought me a drink without ice when I wanted ice, most of the people that I meet at first, I'm perfectly pleasant and charming to, because I want to gain their positive fuel. So all my engagements will be pleasant for people because I want to gain that positive fuel. It is only over time, and invariably with the primary source, that that individual who is the intimate partner would suffer the devaluation. And consequently, those that I engage with through the blog, etc., will not see the negative side of my behaviour because I have no need to show it to them.
That makes sense. That is, I think I've learned a lot just in this last 51 minutes with you.
Well, it is a wide-ranging and fascinating subject. I continue to learn more about myself, and naturally I enjoy having an audience and interacting with people and disseminating this information to them. Because as people often ask me, why do you do it? And the simple fact is part of it is related to my treatment. Part of it is because I really do enjoy writing.
Yeah.
I enjoy having the audience and interacting with some very interesting and articulate individuals who pose often quite challenging questions for me to unravel for them. But ultimately, I derive a perverse sense of delight from the concept of weaponizing all of these empaths and setting them out there around the world to challenge my kind. There is no honour between narcissists. I have no obligations to look after my brethren. So if you become a weaponized empath as a consequence of reading my work, good for you. Go sock it to your narcissist. I really don't care what happens to them. But if you then write to me and say, you helped me, and as many hundreds of people have done, that provides me with a little bit of fuel and validation. So it is not an altruistic basis for those to do it. Nobody should be under any misapprehension in that respect. But the collateral effect of it all is, as I've seen from what people have written, is that they find what I tell them to be a completely unique source and extremely helpful to them.
Yes, and it's been helpful for me. I talked earlier. My biggest battle now is I'm pretty sure the narcissist in my life is realize that they're not going to get anything else from me. So I have to, so that now they use the 5-year-old. So now it's just figuring out how to get that under wraps. That's the next big battle for me. But like I said, I've gotten to the point where there's no need for any sort of contact unless it's an emergency, because I already, there is no talking. So it's unfortunate for the 5-year-old to see her parents have to act like that, but
Indeed, but ultimately you're seizing the power by doing this, and rather than being a father that is fraught with misunderstanding and emotionally all over the place as a consequence of the push and pull and repeated drama of a narcissistic partner, you are able to put yourself in a much better position, which of course will benefit your child. And the sacrifice of not having two parents particularly talk to one another would probably be viewed as a small one in the context of you preserving your sanity so that you're in the best possible place to exert a benign influence over your daughter to try and counter the malign influence that is coming from your narcissistic partner, or former partner rather.
right, yeah, and that's kind of where I'm at with it, because I know it is much more peaceful when I'm not even responding to because they just do it in such subtle ways, just a text, and they'll blow you up. It's just craziness, and so.
That's right. Well, we want to provoke you repeatedly to give us fuel.
Right.
And there are millions of different ways of doing it, and empathic people fall for it repeatedly, and they think, I'm going to ring him up and give him a piece of my mind, or I'm going to ring her up and tell her, what an atrocious human being she is. And you fall straight into the trap of giving us fuel when you do that. And of course we'll pretend to be upset that you're having a go at us, but all we'll do is argue back to keep you arguing with us, because you're giving us fuel. Keep it coming. And we know then when you do that you are a good fuel source again. So we'll keep coming back, and we'll keep having an
Right. And it's and that's, and I mean, we could talk for hours on this, but it's yeah, and it's, yeah, I've cut it off. I don't even respond to it.
Well, there are plenty of ways of being able to deal with it, but the key, as I always mention to people, is, and I've written 3 articles about this, which people have found very helpful. It's all about what I call the post-discard battle. And first of all, we dump you in the emotional sea where you start to drown. You're tired, you're exhausted, nothing makes sense. Your emotions are all over the place. And that's when we can keep picking you up, putting you down, picking you up, putting you down. What you need to do is make a boat made out of logic and understanding so you can sail across the emotional sea. The first time you'll try, you'll just make a little raft, and the emotional sea will wash over you and you'll get dumped back in the sea. So you tried no contact and it didn't work. There's no shame in that. No contact can take 9, 10, 11 times before it's effective. But each time you read more, you gain more understanding, you build a larger vessel, and all of a sudden you have an ocean-going liner. You get across that sea, and then you find dry land. And then when you've got to that dry land, you decide, am I going to continue with my life as before but remain vigilant for the narcissist to come back, or am I now going to build myself a tower and perhaps not do some of the things I did before, stay out of certain places, but remain guarded. But now, as I've got across that sea, I've acquired a greater strength. I've got clarity of thought. Because we want to keep you emotional. Because if you're emotional, you will make bad decisions for you and good decisions for us. Because you will not go forward and you will not progress. We want you tired. We want you not knowing left from right. And we want you wallowing in this emotional sea. And the key to doing it is to read. And if you read, you will understand. And once you understand, you will attain freedom. I know, because I am trying to stop people from achieving all of that. And who better to ask than the very person who's trying to defeat you?
Exactly. It is, and I know for me, the experience with this particular relationship was absolutely the hardest one that I've ever experienced in my life. And
Yes.
I noticed that there was a difference between the previous relationships and then this one. And I think there's something within that realm of the way things are done.
But you were fortunate in a way that you had a benchmark to compare that relationship with and to think something's not right. But invariably, you will not have thought, oh, I've been ensnared by a narcissist.
Right.
You'll have just thought, what's wrong with this person? I can't seem to do anything right. Or she kicks off over absolutely nothing. And then, 4 days are really lovely, and then we have 2 days of hell. So let's try and work together to get back to the 4 days of everything being lovely. None of it makes any sense, because nobody sits there and thinks to themselves, do you know what? I think I've been ensnared by a narcissist. Now I know what to do. And the reason nobody ever thinks that is because of the way we operate, is to get under your radar, make you addicted to us, cause you to fall in love with us, and thus you become totally susceptible to our manipulations. It's insidious, it's highly effective, and invariably, as you mentioned at the outset, Shannon, it's either when you've been discarded and you happen to write, why does she give me such silent treatments in Google, and then up come some options about narcissism, and then you go down the rabbit hole and you read and you read.
Yeah.
You feel a chill go down your spine because you think, my goodness me, she did this and she did that, and what the hell? She has said those words. And then you find H.G. Tudor, and you start to read there, and even more makes sense. Or someone happens to tell you because they've been through it, and you're having a beer, and you explain thing is somebody that loves themselves. But once you start to read about it, you realise the full horror of what it is. But it's only invariably afterwards that you gain that knowledge. And it's something I repeatedly mention, whereby a number of the books I have written are actually preventative in nature to help you see the signs before you get caught. And whilst people are interested in those, they do not attract as much interest as the ones, of course, which deal with the ongoing situation or the aftermath. Because not enough people are actually told or educated about people like me and what we do in order to spot them. The reality is that if people knew enough about it, that they ought to teach it in schools as part of social citizenship or relationships when people are 16, so that when you start dating and there is this unusual behaviour, it doesn't necessarily mean the individual is narcissistic, but there's enough of a warning sign that you might go away and read and take some evasive action. Because I do receive correspondence from people who say that they were ensnared at a young age by a narcissist and they had nothing to compare it to. So they just thought, well, this is what it's like, isn't it? He just happens to be a bit moody, or he uses his fists every once in a while, but isn't that because he likes to drink? And the empathic individual will either blame themselves or blame an external agent. They very rarely say, well, it's his fault because he is a narcissist. And that's why we succeed again, because you have this inherent ability as empathic individuals to always want to understand, but because you don't know about narcissism at the time, you go looking in the wrong places. So you'll blame fatigue, you'll blame stress, you'll blame alcohol, or you'll most of all blame yourselves. I didn't ask him how his day was when he first came in. I must remember to do that next time. Or, I didn't make that meal that he likes, and so on. And it becomes at a point, and you only see this when you look back, you think, goodness me, I was the proverbial treading on eggshells. I was second-guessing everything. Who was that person? And who did I become? But that's what we want. We want you to lose yourself because we regard you as an extension of ourselves and we want to subsume you into us.
Yeah. I think family courts need to wake up to narcissists as well. And I know I read too where you've talked briefly about what creates it. And I know you talked about parents, that generation of parents treating the children special and like basically raising them as that they're special and entitled and all the things rather. And to me that's an unconscious way to raise a child. But again, the disorder is an unconscious disorder. At least in my thoughts, it's. I know now. I study conscious parenting, so when I do have my 5-year-old, which isn't often, but not often enough, but I think hopefully the way I do things will kind of counter the unconsciousness of the other parent.
That is what you have to hope does happen, because as I explained earlier, you will get nowhere in trying to persuade a narcissistic parent to change their ways, to behave differently, because they will not see that they are at fault. And the mere suggestion of saying, do this differently or regulate your behaviour in a different way is a criticism, which will then result in the ignition of fury, and off we go again. Yes,
that is. Now, I won't keep you because I know we've went over what we originally talked about. But on I guess the last thing I will ask about is accountability and responsibility. In my personal situation, she got a protective order against me, lied to the court, got it, but yet and in my opinion, she did it to avoid accountability because it gives her the right to do whatever she wants to do and not have to own any responsibility or accountability not necessarily to me, but when it comes to our little girl, like I haven't, that's what it goes to, she will, we're supposed to have no contact, but yet she'll come to my front door every week. She'll text my phone, and it's like, seriously, And to me, it's just an avoidance of accountability and responsibility, and then again, that control.
Yes, that's right. Well, it is a relatively common tactic of our kind to get a protection order against the victim, because of course we operate with a victim mentality. Everything is everybody else's fault, it's never our fault. We can do as we please. We have no concept of culpability or accountability. And therefore, if, for example, a narcissist hits his spouse, his reaction will be, "You made me do it." And because of the conditioning that goes on, the victim is invariably left thinking that they did do something to provoke it. And that is how your mind is affected and conditioned. And then consequently, on the occasion when you lose, something snaps and you fight back because you're exhausted and at your wit's end, that is when the calculating narcissist will seize that opportunity to use that as evidence that you are unhinged, and in fact, you, the victim, you are the narcissist. You're the one that's the abuser. And then that will be used as evidence to obtain the protection order. Right. And even if there isn't a straw that broke the camel's back, and instead there is a situation whereby we determine that if we anticipate you are going to take such steps against us, because keep in mind, as I mentioned earlier, we suffer from paranoia and wariness. We will think we need to get in first, we need to get our retaliation in first, and because we're habitual liars, it doesn't concern us that we go and tell the police, "Oh, this person's been abusing me, and here's why, and here's what's been done." The fabrication of evidence is not a concern to us. We're entitled to that protection order because we're entitled to do as we want. And you're trying to stop us doing what we want, and therefore that is why we will get that order against you. So, and combine that with no concept of remorse or guilt, we will do whatever is required to protect ourselves and acquire fuel. The end always justifies the means, and all that affects it is how good is that fuel going to be? How difficult is it to get to it? Are there any other obstacles in the way? Those are the criteria. Not should I or should I not do it because it's a good or a bad thing. That doesn't matter.
Right.
I'm entitled to that fuel, but am I going to get it from you or from her or from him? And those are the decisions that apply.
Wow. Yeah, and I know when it comes to this, I'm certainly fighting it because she takes every opportunity. Because I think it's fuel for her to cause me, like I got arrested for violating this protective order because I pissed her off by criticizing her giving our daughter a bath more than every other day or every 2 days or whatever it was at that time. And that sent her into a rage, and that's what it was about. And the next thing I know,
from your perspective, you'd think that's entirely innocuous, and all you were doing was looking out for your child. From her perspective, as I've explained, that was a criticism. The fury is ignited. She lashes out at you, gets you arrested.
Right. Now, yeah, see, that makes sense. Seeing it from the way that they're seeing it.
As I say, you don't have to like it, but you do need to understand it, and then you'll realise that one of the most disorientating things, of course, in life is not knowing why something has happened, and we're the masters of doing that. We never give you the answers. We give you half answers. Our behaviour is a mystery. People sit there and scratch their heads and go round and round and round and round, thinking, why have they done this? And that creates heightened emotions and stops you progressing. So the key for you is understand us, understand why it's happening. And once you do, you can then helps you understand something new, and then that extra strength helps you deal with that manipulation, so that manipulation doesn't work anymore. And it's a progressive thing, it snowballs, until all of a sudden you look and say, do you know what, today I haven't worried about whether she's going to contact me, I haven't felt anxious. In actual fact, if she does contact me, I know how to deal with it. But getting to that point is difficult, but as I always reinforce, the key to do so is to gain understanding, and to do that is to read.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree 100%. You certainly have to understand what you're dealing with. Because I know prior to this, it was the exact same thing. Type to Google in, and oh wow, and and again, I mean, I'm almost 3 years after figuring out that this person was totally basically didn't exist. I mean, she was a whole nother person outside of being in front of me. And it's been 3 years literally of studying and reading, and again, I have, it's a process. It does not happen overnight to understand it and to heal from it. Because it does take time and strength and more awareness and getting your own emotional state back and all of that. It takes a lot of time to have that strength, especially to be able to literally just ignore them, to give them nothing.
That's right. Yes, and the time it takes means you remain vulnerable for a considerable period of time to our manipulations again. And it's all engineered, and it's all by design.
Right. Yeah, I'm thankful I'm not out there. I'm thankful I'm past that. At least I have zero interest in even seeing this person, or talking to them, or I've literally kind of did what you said in the book. Just I've erased it. Outside of the little girl, I don't know. It's. But I don't have any emotions towards that situation anymore. So
yes,
I think it's going to give me a much happier life coming up. But it sent me into an awakening. It made me find myself on a much deeper level. So I will say that. I know it's a dark versus light thing, and I highly appreciate the help that you actually are giving to the healthy hearts and empaths and the understanding of what this is, because it is a deeper thing. And I know here, and I'm sure the UK, because it's everywhere. I know I have friends that are in the UK and they go through the same stuff. And I know, again, it's going to come to education, like you said, in schools. I think would be important. Family courts certainly need to become aware, because I know there are some people, like I'm sure you know Sam Vaknin. Is it Sam Vaknin?
yes.
He recommends that a narcissistic parent absolutely have no custody of a child. And if they see them, that it's under supervised visitation because of the inability to have emotions and understanding the love. So, but that
Well,
is.
the simple fact is that when you're a parent, you should place the needs of your child ahead of everything else.
Mm-hmm.
We do not.
Right.
Our needs are paramount.
Exactly. And I can go to yesterday Halloween on that. It's my little girl lives 2 houses away from me. I got to answer the door as she came to my door. I got to give her candy, but I couldn't walk with her as her dad because of the mom needing. It was about her, instead of our little girl. So.
Oh, absolutely.
But
that's right.
I appreciate your time, HG. I will.
You're very welcome, Sean.
I know you. I really appreciate the length that you went with me on this. I think it's gonna help a lot of people. I will have to read through the comments, and you're more than welcome, obviously, to look at whatever you want on it. I don't,
Absolutely shall.
and I'm sure I will be in touch with you. And again, it's highly appreciative, and I am thankful that you did this today. And
You're welcome.
I hope you have a good night, because I know it's later there. So
It is. It's dusk now here. So it's a very pleasant autumnal evening. So I have an evening engagement ahead of me. Plenty of fuel to gather. So I better go and get myself organised for that.
of course, of course. Well, I will let you go, HG, and then I'm gonna wrap this video up, and I will certainly be in touch with you. So I appreciate it, and I don't know if you have, if you're able to see my page or not. Or you should be able to. I don't.
Yes, I will certainly take a look.
If you want to read through, I think there was a argument at some point with someone on there about someone else completely. So I don't know. I have to read through it myself, but I think this is definitely a very eye-opening thing for people, and I appreciate you. So I will let you go with that, and I will be in touch, sir.
All right then. Goodbye.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Wow, people. That was HG Tudor, and I hope that helped, and was very informative. I mean, HG is a diagnosed narcissist sociopath. He is working with doctors. He does realize what he is. That is why he wants to express and help people with the understanding of what they are. So, with that, I guess, I mean, it's been it was like we were only going to talk like 30 to 45 minutes. So look, he was grateful that he had and gave more time. With that, I'm going to jump off here because I have some stuff to do, and I'm probably going to do a live later tonight, just to kind of talk more about co-parenting. I mean, we kind of went over a lot of what I would talk about today. But I like to spread as much knowledge as I can. So I'm glad people showed up, and I hope it was educational. I hope it opened some eyes. It was intense, because he explains it in a way that it's kind of hard to understand on a lot of things, but I think it was pretty neat. So I hope everybody has a good afternoon, and I'm going to roll out. Namaste.